Hello, I am Angel, and I will discuss the greatest robot on Earth and two of its anime adaptations.
I'm Ray, and I will be talking about differences between Netflix's new anime series, Pluto, and its original manga it was adapted from.
Hi, my name's Emma, and I'll be talking about the idea of the curse of Tezuka and how Tezuka set a precedent for labor conditions in the animation industry in Japan with his first full-length TV series, Astro Boy.
The 1980s version has Urain confront Pluto instead of the Doctor, but she gets kidnapped by Pluto. Meanwhile, in the 1960s version, Dr. Elephant is the one that confronts Pluto, which is much more accurate to the manga. The death of North is similar in all three versions. He is thrown onto a cliff, only to switch his arms into weapons. He dies after being caught by Pluto's horns. In the 1960s version, Urain confronts Pluto after getting a call, and she is kidnapped by Pluto. In the manga, she also confronts him and is captured. In the three versions, Astro Boy finds Pluto and demands his sister back, but Brando rises from the sea and challenges Pluto. Both robots fall into the water, and there is a moment of suspense, but Pluto crawls to land and asks Astro Boy for help. In the manga and the 1960s version, the Sultan appears at the beach along with Dr. Abula. In the manga, Gerhardt asks Astro Boy for help by going to his home, while in the 1980s version, he calls Astro Boy through a computer. Once Gerhardt is back in Germany, Pluto shows up on a rainy night. Gerhardt puts up a fight, and when Pluto attempts to zap him with his horns, they have no effect. Gerhardt holds onto Pluto's horns, and then Pluto pulls him apart and splits Gerhardt in half. In all versions, the Doctor goes to the Sultan to investigate, and is then sent to an underground area with robot crocodiles, but Astro Boy saves him. The manga in the 1980s version had Pluto fighting with Astro Boy, but he lets him go since Astro Boy saves his life after the Bruno fight. The 1960s version has Pluto letting Astro Boy leave with the Doctor without having to fight. The battle between Hercules and Pluto is next, but the manga has Epsilon suggesting cooperation with Hercules, which he refuses. Hercules has a competitive duel with Pluto, but he is zapped when he stands on top of Pluto after assuming that he had won. The biggest changes occur at this time. In the manga, Dr. Tenma appears and is willing to modify Astro Boy into a 1 million horsepower robot. Gerhardt finally appears in the 1960s version when he visits Astro, but he dies like he did in the other two versions. Back to the manga. Dr. Tenma's modifications make Astro malfunction, and he goes after Pluto but sinks under the sea. Pluto tells Urain and Dr. Tenma what happened. Urain demands Pluto to give her back her brother, and then he decides to help Astro. While all of this has occurred after the death of Hercules, in the 1980s version there is a jump to Epsilon saying goodbye to the kids. A kid with a feather on his head is especially devastated. In the manga this also occurs, but Pluto asks Epsilon to help him search for Astro Boy. Pluto gets stuck in the sand after Epsilon tricks him, but Epsilon feels like a coward for doing so. He reflects on the robots that fought Pluto and the kids that love him, but he eventually decides to save Pluto. Urain gives Pluto her favorite sticker, but gets angry when he says he still plans on fighting Astro Boy. Back in the Sultan's place, a man named Dr. Goji challenges the Sultan to a robot duel. Enter Epsilon. The manga in the 1980s version had Pluto fighting Epsilon during the night because he is a photon-powered robot, and this would be a challenge for Pluto. Epsilon then notices the kid with the feather crying. Pluto grabs Epsilon with his horns and kills him while he is distracted with the kid. The kid is left crying on a rainy night. The ending is different for all versions, with the 1960s version having Epsilon fighting Pluto with Astro. Epsilon is injured by Pluto and falls to his death while trying to use a boulder to stop the volcano from erupting. As Astro and Pluto work together, a mysterious man reveals Bora. Pluto and Bora fight and both die after Pluto explodes. The man reveals he is a robot and takes a crying Sultan away. Astro holds on to one of Pluto's horns as he looks at the sky. The 1980s version has Astro and Pluto fighting until they work together to stop the volcano from erupting. Astro helps Pluto find the true purpose of being a robot, and then Bora appears. This Bora is different from the others. It has 2 heads and wheels, and it easily kills Pluto. Astro breaks inside Bora through its shoulder. Astro uses his intelligence to defeat Bora. He makes Bora punch itself, since Astro punches Bora from inside. The doctor that helped the Sultan is revealed to also be a robot. This version ends with Astro holding Pluto's horns and talking to Dr. Elephant. The souls of the robots appear behind them. In the manga, Dr. Goji appears, revealing to the Sultan that he is actually Dr. Abula. Astro appears to fight Pluto. Dr. Elephant notices Astro's change in horsepower and tells him it was unnecessary. Astro knocks out Pluto, causing the volcano to shake. Astro begins to throw boulders at the volcano. Pluto and Bora do not help since they are fighting robots, which angers Dr. Elephant because these two massive robots are essentially useless. Pluto eventually helps Astro and tells him to leave. Dr. Abula then demands Pluto to fight Bora. Pluto's horns get broken by Bora, and then Bora rips apart his limbs. Astro then decides to help Pluto and punches Bora. Pluto then explodes and the Sultan cries in defeat. Dr. Abula is once again revealed to be a robot, and a former servant of the Sultan. Astro holds on to Pluto's horns and tells Dr. Elephant he thinks that one day all robots will be friends. I know that was a lot of information thrown at you, and I know that my voice is not necessarily the most beautiful sounding voice, but I will link the videos to the episodes, so hopefully you can see them and understand what's going on in my commentary. But that's also going to be pretty hard to do because the 1960s version that I found was in a different language, so I don't know how successful you will be in understanding what's going on. But I base my commentary on the fact that the adaptation is at least similar in some ways to both versions, so the 1980s version and the manga. And I based my commentary on the visuals and the chronological order of events. Maybe it isn't the best comparison because of the language, but I didn't necessarily look into the language that much. I instead focused on the actual events that occurred in all three versions. And I think the biggest one is the fact that Astro isn't changed or modified into a 1 million horsepower robot. So I think this was done to push a lesson towards kids that your different qualities make you great, and that isn't necessarily power or strength, and that is instead what you are and who you are. So Astro is able to outlive all the other robots because, number one, he's intelligent, but also because he has sympathy. So we see how Astro is more human-like than the other robots, and this is more evident when you look into the 1980s version and see Bora is just a fighting robot that only repeats Bora, Bora, and it gets really annoying, but it has no soul, it has no mind, it's just fighting, and that's why it kills itself, because it's so stupid, and it's outsmarted by Astro. So I think that's the biggest difference, and I don't necessarily know if I agree with it, because a lot of the events that occur in the manga are lost, but as a kids show, I think it does a pretty good job at pushing a good lesson.
When a single chapter of a manga volume is adapted to an 8-hour-long series of anime, as is in the case for Pluto, the animation will tell a far richer story with advanced world building, character development, and moral messages. This, of course, means that the original work of manga is inevitably required to be enriched with more details and alterations. When we compare Pluto with its original work, Tezuka's The Greatest Robot on Earth, the biggest difference would be the storytelling. Tezuka's manga is told in a third-party omniscient narrative, where the audience is aware of the villain's actions and evil plans from the start to end. Pluto, on the other hand, does the exact opposite. The story begins with the mysterious death of Mont Blanc. Very limited information is revealed to the audience concerning the murder of this robot, casting the story into shadows. As the story in Pluto progresses, information starts to be revealed little by little, until eventually we know the hidden truths. Compared to the straightforward story in the manga, the anime raises enough suspense for the audience to follow through the story for 8 hours. For a long anime adaptation, such a change in storytelling may be necessary. An important theme that is not at all present in Tezuka's work is the extreme similarities between robots and humans. On surface level, this is represented by robot designs in the works. The robots in the manga does have basic human features like standing on 2 legs, using arms for combat, and having a human-like face. However, no one would mistake them for humans with their metallic shells and crudely connected body parts. The anime series does not follow this tradition. In Pluto, only 2 of the 7 most powerful robots retain the form close to their counterparts in the manga. These two robots are Mont Blanc and Norse Number 2, the first two robots to die from Pluto's hands. The other robots that are more involved in the story all obtain a form indistinguishable from a normal human. Robots are also more similar to humans on a level below appearances. The anime gives robot characters human-like emotions through vivid background stories. In the original manga, several robots are shown to have emotions such as empathy, friendliness, and caring. However, these depictions were drowned by the lengthy combat scenes, leaving them almost forgettable. Robots in Pluto are very different. Side robot characters are shown to be deep in love with each other. Many of them express sadness and even tear up. In Pluto's world, robot marriage as well as adaptation programs are legal. The number of robot families in Pluto shows undoubtedly that robots are capable of familial and romantic love. Even in the field of arts that is thought to be exclusive for humans, we see Norse Number 2 intrigued by piano. Not only are robots exhibiting human characteristics, their robot natures are also weakened in Pluto. One main pattern in the manga is the difference between horsepower between robots which indicate their strengths. Throughout the anime series, horsepower is not brought up at all. Even the 7 targets were not chosen for the fact that they had 100,000 horsepower, but because of their advancement, i.e., their approximation to being a human. Most importantly, the sacred rule that states robots cannot harm humans was broken multiple times in Pluto, as many robots are capable of murder, showing robots denying their most fundamental baseline of existence. Although Pluto is very different from the original work, it still encompasses Tezuka's idea of love and self-sacrifice. It has done its best to offer audience today a glimpse into Tezuka's world.
With the release of Pluto asserting Tezuka's continued presence even in anime produced today, we also decided to explore what his impact on Japan's animation industry in both the past and present as a whole might be. With World War II came propaganda and instructional films that allowed for a relatively thriving landscape in Japan for animators, but the immediate post-war period saw severe contraction in the industry. As men returned from war, female laborers disappeared from the scene of Japanese animation in the 1940s, and competition in the labor market was heightened both by the return of soldiers and colonists from overseas and by the influx of former employees of the Manet studio in what had been Japanese-occupied Manchuria. The leading artists of wartime animation were faced with the possibility of being labeled propagandists working in the field of incitement to war, who were therefore liable to prosecution and also of being labeled suspected leftists as the Cold War was brewing. Along with these effects of the post-war period, it was also widely believed in the Japanese animation industry that it was economically unfeasible to produce a weekly TV cartoon. Something would have to give for the anime industry to become that which we all know today. That something was the entry of Osamu Tezuka in the animation industry. Tezuka would break the deadlock over TV with his series Astro Boy, but it would come at a cost, one that some believe is still being paid by animators in particular, even to this day. It is known as the Curse of Tezuka. Tezuka first entered the animation scene as a storyboarder on Doga Toei's 1960 work titled Sayuki, also known as Journey to the West, which he continued for several months. During his time in this role, Tezuka was consistently frustrated by the studio's restrictions on his creativity. Tezuka later wrote about the project, "I learned in a hard way that the more specialized skills the project requires, there is danger of the project losing its personality." The rest of the Journey team was also not happy with the studio, but their reason was Toei's strenuous hours and meager pay that pushed them to their breaking point. According to a member of the team, in order to make the film, each of the animators had been obligated to put in more than 90 hours a month of unpaid overtime to meet schedules. After the film was finished, they formed a union to petition the management for better working conditions. In June of 1961, after the premiere of Journey to the West in 1960, Tezuka set up a new branch of his manga studio, Osamu Tezuka Productions, that was for animation, which he called Mushi Production. He poached many of his staff from Toei as the studio struggled with labor disputes in the 1960s. One animator who moved from Toei to Mushi Productions stated that his salary jumped from 8,000 yen to 21,000 yen, or about 55 USD to 145 USD. With the founding of Mushi Production, work on Astro Boy began. Tezuka slashed the average cell count to just 8 new frames per second and instituted fast cuts, freeze frames, and in-picture zooms. He also established an image bank of cells that could be recycled in later episodes, which drastically reduced costs. Even with these methods, Tezuka still turned to deliberately undervaluing his work in order to produce the work and get it on television, offloading it to the Fuji TV network at a knockdown price intended to match the cost of live-action children's TV, but also to discourage competitors. This first version of Astro Boy aired from 1963 to 1966 and was the first full-length anime TV series, the first Japanese animation dubbed into English for an American audience, and also created the market for children's merchandise. The series, however, established a precarious price point, unable to go into profit without sponsorship deals or foreign rights sales, and Mushi Production collapsed within a decade, ending with its unsuccessful attempt at moving into the adult feature scene with works like Cleopatra. In recent years, vast wealth has flooded the anime market, but even top animators who have worked on some of Japan's most popular anime franchises take home just $1,400 to $3,800 a month. Thousands of lower-rung illustrators do grueling piecework for as little as $200 a month. Rather than improving conditions, the industry's explosive growth has only widened the gap between the profits illustrators help generate and their extremely low wages, and the hours demanded by production companies remain severe. This is what many believe to be the lasting result of the horrendous working conditions and pay set by Tezuka with his path to the production and televising of Astro Boy that is credited as being the roots of the curse of Tezuka.